Hello everybody and welcome to another episode of Bored with Each Other, the podcast that looks at gaming through the lens of playing as a couple. So whether that's with your other half, a very good friend, or the person that delivers your board games that you now just won't let leave. I'm joined as ever by my wife, player 2 and co-host, Hannah.
Hi guys.
And my name is Elle Simpson, and today we are going to be talking about Aeon's End. Eon's End. I will keep calling it Aeon's End. I'm sorry about that. Sorry, not sorry.
That's a whole side thing over again, isn't it?
Yeah, I always get the two mixed up. But Eon's End is a cooperative deck builder in which the players play as breach mages in a dark fantasy post-apocalyptic world where they are protecting the last bastion of humanity, called Gravehold, from a horrendous, large, big, bad demon monster thing known within the game as the Nemesis. The game itself basically works as each player chooses a character, which all have sort of different abilities that you can charge up over the course of the game. And you start with a rudimentary sort of basic starter deck of cards, as you do in many deck builders, and you purchase cards from a marketplace. The marketplace is a grid of 9 cards, 3 of which are more sort of resource currency cards, 2 are relics, which are things that just sort of help manipulate the game mechanics as such, and 4 are spells, which are your main means of doing damage to the enemy. There's 2 twists to it in comparison to a lot of normal deck builders. The first one is that the turn order is not set. Each turn you have a deck of cards that basically randomize the turn order for that round, and each player and the Nemesis goes twice during that round, but you never know which order that's going to occur in. The other twist is when you discard cards at the end of your turn, you choose which order to put them into your discard pile, so you can basically it cuts down on the luck. You basically can construct your deck in a way that you kind of know what's coming, and you can kind of put cards next to each other that play off each other, which is an interesting mechanic. Once you've chosen the Nemesis, and they all play the same but slightly differently, they all have different sort of win conditions and different ways and means of beating you up, basically. You can either choose to populate the marketplace from the bank of cards that you have, or, as we often do, you can randomize their grid, occasionally with the odd mulligan when we get something that we know is just not going to be workable at all. And that's basically how the game plays. The way you basically cast spells is you have 4 breaches on your playmat. They're called breaches, and they're almost like spell gates. And during your turn, you can prep a spell to one of those gates, and at the start of your next turn, those spells all fire. So it's not sort of instant. You take 2 rounds to actually do damage to the enemy. You usually start with one of those breaches open and usable, and you have to spend currency to open the other ones during the course of the game. And the ones at the end, which cost the most, add damage to your spells. They basically buff your spells. Each turn that the Nemesis goes, it draws from its own deck, and it will do things dependent on which one you're playing. So whenever they attack, they have different mechanics that they fire off. Each player starts the game with 10 life, and if that life's depleted during the course of the game, you don't get knocked out completely. You can carry on playing, but your usefulness is vastly diminished, which has happened to us a few times. You also have a life counter for Gravehold, which is your home, and regardless of the win conditions, if that ever gets depleted to 0, the players lose the game. Sometimes you can win the game by running the Nemesis deck out. Other times you lose the game if you run the Nemesis deck out. It completely depends on which one you're playing against. But that's basically it in a nutshell. Anything that I've missed? Anything you want to add?
So the Nemesis deck gets progressively harder as you move through the game.
Yeah.
It has level 1 cards 2 and 3, and there are minions as well that come out of the Nemesis deck. So not only are you fighting the Nemesis, you're also fighting his subordinates.
So yeah, I mean, I think this is one of the first deck builders, proper full-on deck builders that we picked up. I think it'll always have a special place in my heart because it was the first board game you ever bought me without asking me what I wanted.
Yeah.
You went off and did your own sort of research, and so it was a complete surprise. I'd never heard of it before. You just got me out. I think it was for a birthday or something. So yeah, it's got. I have a lot of affection for it because of that.
I would also point out that I didn't buy him a damaged version. So if any of you have listened to our Stardew Valley episode, yes, it wasn't a damaged version. But yes, I think we've had this game for quite a long time, I think, in terms of our board game journey.
I think you bought it quite early on after its release.
Yeah,
retail.
It was really new, I think, when I bought it. And so we've played it an awful lot over the years. And yeah, I think, I've got very fond memories of it.
We only have one expansion for it, just for the listeners' awareness, which is one of the small ones. I think it's called the Long Dark. There's a whole load of expansions that basically come with 1 or 2 new Nemesis, a couple of new Breach Mages, and as is the way with card games, a whole bunch of new cards that you can add to it. So yeah, what's your general experience with deck builders? You're quite a fan of a deck builder, aren't you?
Yeah, well, this was the first one that I'd played, and I think
Star Realms.
Oh, yeah, perhaps maybe Star Realms we played first. But I definitely think I instantly fell in love with it because it's quite a quick, fast-playing game. And I was very rapidly able to construct my own deck and do my own thing. I felt like I had a lot of agency, and I definitely really fell in love with this game quite quickly, I think.
Yeah, I think my feelings were similar. I played a lot of collectible card games and things like that, where obviously you go away and you construct your deck, and again Marvel Champions, which we spoke about in an earlier episode. But this is the first sort of, aside from Star Realms, first game I play where you construct your deck during the game. So yeah, again, it's got quite a big soft spot in my heart because of that, because that's where I first sort of learned and experienced that mechanic, which has become one of my favourites.
And it's also quite challenging, I think. So it's not one of these games that's really, really easy to win every single time. And even now, after playing it for years and years, we still struggle to beat the Nemesis. And
yeah, I mean, I think it's got that. You say that. I think in terms of difficulty, the co-ops that I've experienced, I would say it's on I put it, if I had to split them into 2 in the harder and easier camp, I'd probably put it in the easier camp, because I do think we'd win roughly half of our games.
That's because I'm very good.
Well, this is true. You are very good, yes. But aside from your general genius, if you look at a lot of the other co-ops that we really love and enjoy, I'd say it's more sort of 70-30 split to win and lose, whereas this, I would say, is roughly 50-50. I would say we win this more than we win Champions.
Oh, really?
Yeah. Yeah, looking at our stats.
Yes, so Al has stats. I don't.
I am a stats nerd. But yeah, from when I've started recording them, we do tend to win this about half the time.
Oh, okay.
But that's not to say it's easy. It is challenging. And it's not a complete cakewalk. And if you ever did feel that it was becoming a bit of a cakewalk, there's really neat ways to up the difficulty that come in the rulebook, so you can push the difficulty up.
Maybe we should do that.
Yeah, we could always try that, yeah. I mean, I also just, really like to win. I need the wins.
I know, you've got to take them when you can find them, right?
Yeah, exactly. Right, so should we get on to scoring and having a chat about the game itself, whether it's any good?
Yeah.
I mean, I think there'll be a bit of spoilery chat. We obviously both quite like it, but I think we'll go into the specifics a little bit. So, as ever, do you want to take it away?
Yeah.
Scoring categories?
So, under our general category, the first one that we have is components. So, the box itself, including things like board space and set up and strip down.
Yeah.
So, I have to say the artwork on the cards and the player mats is really quite exceptional. I really like it. It's very thematic. Definitely makes you feel like you're in end times. Lots of fire and brimstone and smouldering stuff and crystals.
Yeah, it's all very grim, dark fantasy, isn't it?
Yeah, plays to my aesthetic.
Yeah, which I obviously love. And I mean, the box art, which I'm looking at now, looks like a gigantic Satan with 4 arms. So, if that's your bag, I know it's mine.
I'm pretty sure that's Diablo.
It does look a bit like that, doesn't it? Yeah, but yeah, I'd agree. The artwork's great. I mean, artwork, if you're playing a mostly card game, artwork's always going to be quite important, isn't it? It needs to look good on the table, and it does. I also really like the actual Breach Mage mats. They're nice, thick, weighty cardboard. Like the decent player mats.
What I will say is that you get a whole bunch of tokens that come with it. So some are for like power counters or various other bits and pieces. Your life counters, particularly the 1 life and charges, which is something we've not actually talked about, are really quite small and tiny.
Very fiddly and tiny.
They're really fiddly. And in fact, I think probably a couple of months ago, I stood up and just had a whole bunch of charges just that had fallen on my lap, and I was sort of shedding charges around the house.
Yeah.
So if you've got perhaps perhaps maybe arthritis or something like that, then it's going to be really fiddly and difficult to play.
Or if you struggle a little bit with eyesight, to be honest, because they are quite small, so it's something worth raising up. The other slight issue I have with it is the teardown, the strip down, because you have to construct the decks, particularly the Nemesis deck. It can take a little. It feels like it's too long for the type of game it is.
Yeah, I also feel that's partly my fault because I've never ever set up or stripped down the Nemesis deck. So I looked at it and was like, nope, that's an Aeon job. Well, I swanned off and poured myself another glass of wine and did whatever it was that I did, and therefore you get saddled with the majority of it, and therefore also putting everything back into the box.
Yeah, I mean everything does fit back in the box nicely, which is always good. It comes with sort of one of the few card games I've ever seen that actually comes with dividers, which is really, really nice, as a named dividers.
Unlike the dividers that we threw away in another game that we haven't.
Yeah, well, let's not talk about that.
Let's not talk about that.
But yeah, the teardown can take a little while. Setup is super quick.
And I really like that they have randomizer cards. In fact, I wish that they had randomizer cards for the Nemesis and the players.
Yeah.
Obviously, we do randomise it and we just shuffle the actual mats themselves.
Yeah.
But it would be a nice little touch, I think.
Yeah.
Also, a couple of the Nemesis, the big bads, they've got lots of little things that go on their mats. So I'm thinking about
extra mats,
and that's a bit fiddly. So I'm thinking about the one that has all the Prince of Gluttons or something like that. I think. And that's just a bit messy, but I don't think that's necessarily a problem. I think that's more my OCD status.
Yeah, fair enough. Yeah,
liking to keep things neat.
It does feel a little. Some of the stuff does feel a little bit cheap and cheerful, but that's not a real impediment to me. You know, if you like your deluxification of board games, this might feel a bit retro, but I don't particularly have a problem with that. In terms of board space, it plays fairly compactly. It doesn't take up a huge amount of room. Easily plays on law.
And I think you could probably strip it out of the box and travel with it quite easily.
Yeah. I mean, trying to find some way to actually play it would probably be a bit more challenging. But yeah, it's got quite a small footprint in that regard. So yeah, I think overall, mainly because of the teardown, I have given it a 6.
So I gave it an 8, and that's probably because I don't do the teardown.
Quite possibly.
Setup. That's an L problem.
So there's your tip. Avoid the strip down. You'll be a lot happier. Right, so on to complexity. So just as a reminder, with complexity, we don't rate things highly or lowly just for being complex or simple. It's more about how well the complexity suits the game, and whether it's sort of worthwhile and earned. You know, you can get some games that are incredibly complex, but you just feel like this is fiddly for the sake of fiddly. And we also talk a little bit about analysis paralysis and arguing over
my
rules.
own nemesis.
Yeah, your nemesis. So yeah, how do you feel about the complexity of it?
So each turn of combat, whether that be the nemesis phase or your player phase, is fairly quick and fairly rapid, and therefore the rules I think are quite straightforward and quite simple because you can't have really complex rules when actually turns are so quick and fast paced. As with most, I guess, card or deck builders, the devil is kind of in the actual cards themselves.
Yeah, the complexity comes from the cards.
Yeah.
But saying that, I find the cards in this way more simple than a lot of other card games. Like they are fairly obvious rules. There's nothing that's like, oh, well, you know, what does that do again? There's not loads of keywords and things like that where you're like scratching your head and trying to remember what they do.
And when we did have the expansion, when we bought the expansion, there were a couple of new rules that were introduced that were really, really simple and straightforward and just slotted into the existing gameplay really, really easily. Yeah. And actually where there was a bit of ambiguity, so for example when you deal additional damage based on, you know, discarding cards for example, the card itself made it really clear whether that was carried over onto your open breaches. So sometimes your open breaches give you more damage, and I think it made that really, really clear. I would say we check the rules less, and we certainly go to Google less for this game than we do for a lot of other games. I think
pretty much most of our games, aside from the back page to remind myself what the Nemesis deck construction looks like during setup, I very rarely look at the rulebook in this during a game. Very, very rarely. And it's always been that way. It's not just because we played it loads. And even if we leave it for months and we come back to it, it's straight back into it and without having to swat up, basically.
And actually, I mean, that's a point to note, really, isn't it? When we've gone back to Marvel Champions after a short hiatus, and actually we've gone back and gone,
what does that do again? What
Whereas
does
for
this mean?
this, It's just not the case at all.
Yeah, absolutely.
So I don't think it's not overly complex. It's not complex for complexity's sake, and it's not also too simple where it just feels
rote.
Yes.
Yeah.
I think it absolutely hits the nail right on the head in terms of its level of complexity.
Yeah, and I think again a lot of the complexity comes from your own making. The complexity is working with the marketplace, constructing a deck that works on the fly, and again putting the cards in order. The discard pile. I mean, talk about me and my very many failings. I cannot wrap my head around that. I always mess that up. I can't envision the phase of flipping the deck over and it being in the other direction. It's almost like some kind of mental block I've
because
got.
When you discard them and you rebuild that deck, you have to build it face up. So
that you flip it over before you actually get to it. So yeah, that always flummoxes me. But that's definitely a me problem. So yeah, what would you score it?
8.
Yeah, same. Just absolutely 8. All
right. So our next category under the general theme is shelf life. So we talk about things like value for money and replayability.
Yeah, I mean, it's great. To put it in a word, I never tire of going back to it, and I think I've played this game probably more than any other without the constant expansion itch.
Yeah.
I guess because there's so many different permutations just in the basic box of the various cards that you have in the marketplace and the different ways the nemesis play.
BBGs.
The BBGs play. I'm still as excited about it as I always was, which is immense shelf life.
Yeah, I would say that the original box that we got, we played, and we played it really thoroughly, and we played it well. We definitely, I think, were ready for an expansion.
Yeah.
But, I mean, partly because we took a bit of a hiatus for various reasons. We're still playing. There are still cards in there that I've never seen before.
Exactly. We play and things come out that we've never seen before.
Yeah, and I think in some ways, that replayability is absolutely there. I would like a couple more Nemesises.
Yeah.
BBGs. At this point. But again, I mean, how long have we been playing this? What, 7, 8, maybe years?
No, not quite that long. Probably about 5 or 6, I think. Anyway, well, what is time? But yeah, I would agree. I think more expansions will always be great. There's always the temptation, especially with card games. I'm a card completionist magpie. But yeah, I haven't had the same pull as I get with, for instance, Marvel Champions, where I constantly want new content, but with this, less so.
So, when rating this, I found it quite tricky, because I rated Marvel Champions, which I love, a little bit on the low side, which I maybe in hindsight probably shouldn't have done, because I felt that there was a bit of a con there in terms of having to buy all the cards to have a functional deck. And I think Marvel Champions is more replayable than this.
Yeah.
So I kind of, whilst I actually want to rate it higher, I've only rated it a 6 because I feel like actually it should sit beneath Marvel Champions, and perhaps in hindsight maybe I should have changed my Marvel Champions rating.
I think you should probably draw a line under Marvel Champions and just rate this. We're reviewing this today, not in comparison to anything else, so rate it what you think you should rate it.
Okay, well I will change my rating then.
Okay.
So I'm probably going to rate it an 8.
Okay. I would also rate it an 8.
Yeah.
It's an immensely replayable game. I mean, value for money, I'm not too sure, to be honest, because I don't know how much the base game goes for these days. If it's still available, I'm not sure. So difficult to judge.
It was pre-kids, so I probably had a lot more disposable money.
Yeah. So difficult to tell with that one. But just on the replayability alone, I would absolutely, it's an 8.
Yeah.
Okay. So final one. Is it any fun?
Well, I don't know. Absolutely. The fact that we've played this so many times, the fact that we're still playing it now, it is absolutely a whole world of fun. I quite like that the games are relatively short. We didn't talk about average length of game.
No, we didn't.
I reckon it's probably about 45 minutes, maybe?
Yeah, it usually runs about 45 minutes. So it's set up and tear down. You can get the whole thing done in an hour, usually.
Yeah. So I quite like the fact that it's quite quick. Quite often we might start off with one of these and maybe go on to something else a bit shorter afterwards.
Yeah.
And I have a lot of fun playing it. I love the fact that I manage to flex and think, do things on the fly. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, one of my favourite things about it is the randomness of the turn order. I find that consistently nail-biting and exciting because you do not know who's going to get to go next. And you can end up in a permutation where the nemesis goes 4 times in a row, because it'll go twice at the end of a round, and then it'll have the first 2 turns in the next round, and that's brutal. But again, when that happens, you then know you've got 4 player turns of breathing room. So it's this constant push and pull mechanic of it that I absolutely love. And if you listen to the previous episodes, you'll know I love a bit of random in my games, and that gives me that hit of random where you can plan all you like, but at some point the game might screw you over, or you might get blessed with this incredible 6 player turn run, which is awesome.
And I definitely think as well, when you get towards the end of the game where you've got some really good spells in your deck and you start churning it out, you start to feel really powerful. Yeah. And everybody likes to be a fabulous wizard.
Yes, absolutely. Yeah. I think the variability of the characters, because every character is basically I didn't talk too much about charges and the intro, but basically you can spend resources to charge up your special ability. So instead of buying cards, you would add a token to your mat, and they all have sort of 5 or 6 slots to activate. But they tend to be like specials where you do something really, really cool or powerful, and some of those are really fun when you get them going, like really good fun. And it just adds a level of sort of individualness to each character. They do play quite differently. They also have different costs to open their breaches, so some open their breaches easier than others, which makes them slightly better in the mid-game. There's just so much variety there. The one thing we haven't really talked about, I guess, is theme, which is quite an odd one, this one, because I usually love a bit of theme, and I like the whole setting, what have you, but I haven't really read the back of the cards where they give you all the individual storylines.
We did to begin with.
We did to begin with, but I haven't for a long time.
We absolutely did, and then we stopped.
Because I'm usually a complete stickler for that.
Yeah, no, we absolutely did to begin with. I suppose because it's quite a fast-paced sort of card game, I don't know how much I feel like I'm in an apocalyptic end. Well, it doesn't feel that bleak. It feels actually quite happy.
That's because you enjoy playing it.
Yeah.
But yeah, I mean, it's a great fun game. Emergent storytelling, perhaps less so, I guess, than some other games that we've got. I don't think we sort of have the mind's eye RPG-ness of like, oh, I've done this, and seeing it. Not even Champions does that, which this doesn't really. No. But again, that might be our own fault for not delving into the lore enough or whatever. But yeah, overall, I would give it an 8 for fun.
So I would give it a 7.
Yeah, fine. So if we tot up the scores, that gives us a total of 7.6, and as always, we round up. So that's a general game score of 8 out of 10, which I believe is our highest so far.
I couldn't possibly comment.
Stats Boy says yes, it is. Right, so on to our couples and 2-player ratings.
Okay, so our first rating under this is Table Talk. So that's how much dead time there is on the board, how much you're talking to each other, like getting to know each other. So what do you think?
I think it's really good for that, mostly because it's so snappy. The turns move along with such a clip. You're always asking other advice about what to buy from the market, like do you think that's a good thing to get, all that kind of stuff. Even during the setup phase, if you are doing sort of the random approach, there's talk there. You're constantly discussing strategy and what you should do next.
Or lamenting that the big bad has done something horrible to you.
Yeah.
Or that Gravehold is rapidly dying and are we going to get through this?
And there's a lot of instances where people take damage, but you get to choose who takes the damage. So it'll say things like any player suffers this. So there's immediately that discussion amongst yourselves, sort of forces that discussion where it's not just happening to one of you. You go, okay, I'll take that, all that kind of thing. So there's almost this very egalitarian approach to getting mullered by the boss.
Yeah, no.
which is quite unique in its own way.
Yeah. I also think, again, maybe because this is one of the first board games that sort of we owned and we played quite a lot. There wasn't a huge amount of there was quite a lot of getting to know you.
Yeah.
So this is when I began to understand a little bit more about your play style and how you work versus me, which is much more about mana conservation and sort of trying to make the best choices. You're very much focused perhaps on damage dealing and getting maximum impact.
Yeah.
So I think that was quite fun after being together however many years we've been together.
Very many years.
Being able to find out a little bit about you and how you operate, which I quite like.
Yeah, I would echo that. So yeah, I gave it a 9 for that.
Oh, so I gave it a 6, mainly because I think a lot of it is around in-game stuff that's happening rather than necessarily that perhaps emergent storytelling and that sort of thing.
Okay.
I still think it's good, and I still think it's great for couples to play.
Okay, all right.
It's just...
Fair enough. I like quick, snappy, speed dating style conversation.
Yes.
You want something a bit more meaningful. Fair enough. Noted. Right, so our next one is around either competitiveness or co-op. So when we talk about co-op, how well does it actually work as a co-op? And what's the capacity for things like quarterbacking, where one person basically just rules the game and says what everybody needs to do. As we mentioned with the Marvel Champions, there's a similar kind of thing here, where because you have your sort of your own deck hidden from the other player, I think that does cut down on quarterbacking. I think it's quite a difficult game to quarterback because you and again the turn order thing kind of throws out the window sometimes. You could try and say, oh, you need to do this next turn, but what if that next turn is not that person?
Yeah, so, you can't plan out your turns really. You have to be quite reactive.
Yeah, or others for that matter. So is that, as you say, reactive? That's a really good term for it. That essence of reactivity kind of cuts down the ability for somebody to do that.
What I also really like about Aeon's End, perhaps compared to some of the other ball games that we have, is that I think once you've picked up and you've had your first couple of games and you've kind of got your head around the mechanics and know what you're doing, I don't think it matters if you're playing with somebody who's played 100 games or whether they're just as new as you. I don't think that matters, and there's a nice balance there.
That's really interesting. I hadn't thought about it from that perspective, but yeah, I think you're right. I think you're somebody who played 100 games. Quite easy to tell with somebody who played this for the first time,
and you'd be quite even Stevens.
Yeah, they both have a really good time. I mean, obviously there'd be some tactical stuff where the veteran player could advise on, but I think for the most part it wouldn't cut down the fun of the newbie as such. So it'd be a good game to sort of introduce to somebody else, even though you played it loads.
Yeah, and I don't think I've seen that in other sort of cooperative games or even competitive games before. Certainly at a two-player variety. So I think for me, again, if we're recommending this to people who are couples, perhaps one of you has got more experience playing board games, then this would be a really good starting point if you want to delve a bit deeper into
absolutely
board games.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, in terms of how well it works as a co-op, I think it works fine, but I do feel like there's an element sometimes of there's not enough card interaction or mechanic interaction between the players. I feel like a lot of other co-ops you can do more for each other, whereas a lot of the time this definitely feels like you're standing side by side, funneling your efforts towards beating the bad guy, but there's very little sort of interaction between the two of you. There
are a couple of touch points, I guess, so that's around your ultimate abilities, or the thing that you build up charges for, and I think some of the cards that we've got in later expansions, or the expansion,
play with that a bit more.
Yeah, they play with that a little bit more, so you're able to cast a spell from another person's breach, for example. But yeah, agreed.
Yeah.
Do I think it is something that's missing from the game? Meh.
Yeah, fair enough. Okay, so what would you give it for that?
An 8.
Yeah, I gave it a 7.
Yeah, that's reasonable.
Okay, final one is FOMO and scalability. So this is around, do you feel like you're missing out by playing this just a two-player? And on the flip side of that, would it scale well if you did have more people over, you had a group of friends, whatever, you wanted to introduce it?
I think it's probably worth noting here that when you play as two players, you have two, in the turn order deck, you have 2 of each of your player counters and 2 Nemesis decks, but that changes when you play with more?
Yes, that does change when you play with more. I can't remember the exact makeup. I think the Nemesis still gets 2 turns, but
maybe
I think
you only get one each.
You only get one each, so you're playing with 3 players.
That's brutal.
It's actually a little bit harder.
Yeah.
I'm not 100% sure on that, but it does change. It does change the makeup of the turn order deck.
Yeah. So the rudimentary mechanics change, but actually nothing else changes about the games. It's still exactly the same
everything else is the same. The Nemesis deck has more cards in it, if you add players. I think this is an absolute sweet spot too. I don't feel like there's anything missing from playing it as a two-player game as opposed to more. I haven't played it with more people. but I don't feel like it. I'm sure it would play quite fine, but I don't think it would add anything to it.
Yeah, absolutely, completely agree with that. And I look at it and I think of it as a 2-player game, and I don't think I've ever even wanted to try out more people.
No, not particularly. No.
And I think, whereas even Champions, I think I like to play it more with a third person. And Stardew, we talked about that as well.
Yeah.
But I think it's absolutely perfect as it is.
Yeah, that's absolutely runs absolutely fine as a 2-player game. To the point that there's so many other games I would pull out if we had more people around the table.
Yes, yeah.
Because I think there's games that really, really sing when you've got a group, and I just think this is the same. It's a great game, but, you know, the taking advantage of the opportunity of having more people to play with, I just don't think it would hit the table.
Yeah.
Okay.
So for that reason, I will score it a 10.
Yep, I give it a 9.
Yep.
So that gives us a couple/2-player rating of 8. So that's an 8 and an 8, which I definitely think is our highest scoring game so far. So one that we unequivocally recommend for both the game in general and playing it as a pair. Any other final thoughts? One thing I do want to add is obviously things have moved on since we got this, and there's now a legacy version of this.
Yes, I really
which
want
I
to play it.
very much have my eye on, because I think the idea of actually having sort of a state that moves from game to game and a deck that you keep throughout, I love the sound of that, so it's definitely something that I think I'm going to pick up at some point.
Yeah. And the added advantage, any of the cards that you get from the legacy version, you can port straight across into the base game. So.
Yeah, it just acts as a massive expansion once you're done with it, because one of the things that always gives me the heebie-jeebies a little bit about legacy games are the one and done kind of thing.
I'm not ripping this card up, I'm not doing it!
Still remember taking my copy of Pandemic Legacy to the tip that day, which is a very weird feeling, because we needed the space. So yeah, I definitely think there's more legs in this, and I'm very far from done with it, and I'm definitely have my eye on the legacy version.
Yeah, I think this would be one of the last games that we would get rid of, and probably one of the first games to replace should someone come in and steal board games that have horrendous board game themes.
Please don't let that happen. Right, okay. So thank you all very much for listening. Obviously, we've got all of our social medias, Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, if you want to follow us on there and join the community and the conversation. If you're listening to this on a podcast medium that lets you leave reviews, a nice review would be very much welcomed, of course. And until next time, have fun, be good to each other, and play lots of games.